Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Today we will be talking about an election prediction between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. Now this is something that must be talked about because looking at the betting markets, people betting on, political elections and political events and all that, the bettors give Kamala Harris a 41% chance of being the Democratic nominee in 2024, Joe Biden 38% chance. So technically, according to the betting markets, Kamala Harris is more likely to be the Democratic nominee in 2024 than Joe Biden is. So this question, if we're doing Biden versus Trump election predictions, the question must be brought up, how would Kamala Harris do in a general election, versus Donald Trump instead? So this will be a lot trickier for a lot of reasons. There's been non-stop polling for months on end now, Biden versus Trump. Very few have been conducted, especially in these recent weeks and months when Joe Biden, it looked like, was certain to be the nominee in the matchup of Kamala Harris versus Trump. So we have, far few as many polls that have Kamala Harris versus Trump. So just overall, we just have less data, less polling numbers, less information to make an accurate election prediction. So, to be honest, a lot of this will be, not go off of numbers, but, more vibes. But obviously, we still do have some numbers. Oops, I didn't mean to pull this up. But, rather, we do have, just as a general idea of how the nation, or how, nationwide, how this election might go. Even with that, we have conflicting data. So there was a CNN poll that came out a few days ago. And, this got a lot of attention because out of the 5 Democrats that the CNN poll included, Biden, Harris, Gavin Newsom, Pete Buttigieg, and Gretchen Whitmer, Biden did the worst. He trailed Trump by 6%, which is just not winnable for Biden. While Kamala Harris did the best at only trailing Trump by 2, which is definitely a winnable election. But a poll came out today from a different pollster that shows Kamala Harris down by 11%, which is obviously, that would just be a Trump landslide. And then in Trump versus Biden, Trump only ahead by 5, which still isn't very winnable as of now for Biden, but a lot better than 11. You can maybe come back from a 5 point whatever trailing. So we have very conflicting data here, and I don't really know what to go with. Who does know? So let's go state by state and see what happens. I forgot to, of course, pull up the 2020 election numbers, but I do have many memorized, so that's good. So in Trump versus Harris, I still do think that the nation as a whole would trend to the right from 2020. I think that Trump would make gains. I think that he would do really far better than he did in 2020. So that being said, every single state that he won by a safe margin in 2020, he would also win by a safe margin in 2024. So that means a safe margin is a 15% margin or more. So that's Utah, Wyoming, Idaho, Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska at large, Nebraska's 3rd district, Oklahoma, Kansas, Kansas was likely in 2020, but that becomes safe. Louisiana, Arkansas, Missouri, Kentucky, Tennessee, Indiana, West Virginia, Mississippi, Alabama. So those are all the safe states, plus Kansas. And then Nebraska's 1st district was likely, but that becomes safe. Alaska becomes safe for sure. South Carolina, I doubt it, because, Harris, of course, is number 1, a woman, number 2, an African American. Those 2 factors play huge parts in presidential elections. That matters enormously. So that will definitely come into consideration in many of these battleground states, which we'll get to. Definitely in South Carolina with very high African American population. Now, I forgot to pull up another tab, but Iowa is looking like in Trump versus Biden, it would be safe. I think that in these overwhelmingly white states, I really think that Harris just will not be able to connect in any sort of way with these voters. At least Obama. Obama was an African American. It's not just about race, but really, unlike Joe Biden in many ways, Joe Biden isn't that good at it, but Kamala Harris, I just feel like, won't connect at all with these more rural voters who are, economy driven and faith based. Joe Biden is very faithful. He's very religious. and at least, I don't know, he didn't perform abysmally with rural voters, but I feel like Kamala Harris definitely would a lot more. So a state like Iowa, I think, would become safe. But now, safe states for Kamala Harris, for the Democrat now, that would be Washington, California, Hawaii, New York, New Jersey would be close, but I wouldn't say it is. Washington, D.C., Maryland, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Delaware, Connecticut would be safe, I think, Vermont, and Maine's 1st District. So, as well as Illinois, Biden won it by about 16.5, I think, in 2020, so that would stay with Kamala Harris. So Kamala Harris does take a lead with 159 electoral votes to Donald Trump's 122. I will say this, in the Trump versus Biden matchup, it was just about even, so whatever, that tells you what you need to know. And then, now let's move on to likely states. We'll start with Kamala Harris now. So these are states that will be decided by a 5 to 15% margin. So we do have some very Democratic states that will not quite be a 15% margin, but pretty close. That's Oregon, Colorado, New Jersey. Not much for a surprise here. New Jersey polling indicates that it will be close. I don't really trust it at all. There was a poll from 2020, I think, that showed Biden leading in Arkansas by 2%. Trump won it by 36. Polling can be way off sometimes, just way off. So all of those states I would characterize as likely, and to be completely honest with you all, not to spoil it too much, but that's it. It is just these 3 states that are likely for Kamala Harris, which is not good at all, especially when you look at Trump's likely states, because there are a lot. South Carolina wouldn't be quite likely. Biden won it by 11, but Kamala Harris sticks around there because she does have African-American turnout. That will be a positive for Kamala Harris. Being an African-American woman, she will have high African-American turnout, which is what, in poll after poll, Biden is struggling with. North Carolina, Georgia, and Texas all look like lost causes for Joe Biden right now, largely due to the fact that, especially in Georgia, very low African-American turnout in 2024. There was just no enthusiasm in the part of African-Americans for Joe Biden right now. So South Carolina is likely. Texas went to Trump by 5.6 in the last election. I just don't see Kamala Harris winning it. I don't know. I mean, you've got Latino voters who are more moderate, and Kamala Harris is, and the Trump campaign will definitely paint her very much as a radical liberal, which he was very unsuccessful with in 2020 with Biden, because, Biden was, in 2020 even, a very old man, and he did seem in many ways very traditional. It was hard to paint him, this very boring type of normal guy, as a radical liberal. Kamala Harris, with her record, I definitely think, being younger, I think that the Trump campaign will effectively paint her as a quote-unquote radical liberal, very extremist, very progressive. And Latino voters, Hispanic voters, very moderate, if not leaning right, which is, a major shift from a decade ago. That'll decrease Latino turnout, associating her with socialism that would have been successful if Bernie Sanders had been the nominee in 2020. But, you can't really paint Joe Biden as a socialist. Trump tried in the debates and everything, and it was, very unsuccessful. Kamala Harris, that would be a different story. Florida would also be likely. Of course, that is trending so much to the right. So you got Texas, Florida, Ohio, very close to being safe. These Rust Belt voters. These Rust Belt voters will be critical. And this comes in with Ohio, and Iowa, and of course the blue wall. Trump won Rust Belt voters. The white working class voters. Those are the voters that brought Trump to victory in 2016. That is how he won the blue wall, all of it. Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, as well as Iowa and Ohio by unprecedented margins. And it was because of his drain the swamp message, right? He was anti-establishment and all that. That is how he won these very anti-establishment voters. Biden won them back, even though he's definitely more of an establishment figure, but many voters just wanted a return to normalcy. I think that with Kamala Harris as the nominee, Trump would bring them back, especially Harris being part of the Biden administration. Many of these economy-driven voters, like white working class voters, view the Biden presidency as a flop, as a fail. I think that, with that reason, as well as, Trump being him, with all these trials and everything, I think that they would return back to Donald Trump, especially if it's Harris versus Trump. These white working class voters, I think, would turn out in higher numbers for Trump in a Harris versus Trump matchup than a Biden versus Trump matchup. So a state like Ohio, very close to being safe, but it did go to Biden by 8, so we're not going to see an 8-point shift to the right. Maine second, absolutely, likely Trump, if not safe margins. And, this is tough. I'm sorry, I'm kind of blanking here because, again, there's just so little data with these very conflicting polls. And we certainly don't have any state-by-state polling, which is just so critical in making an election prediction. A likely margin, I would put Wisconsin. I believe that there are a lot of, more return to normalcy, more traditional-minded voters who, especially, across the Rust Belt region. I think that there are, enough older voters who like how presidential Biden is compared to Donald Trump, who might just turn out for Biden, who might turn out for Biden just for that fact, just because of that fact. They like Biden's demeanor. Now, Kamala Harris, it's a different candidate, especially Trump campaign painting her as a radical liberal. This will definitely decrease older voter turnout for Kamala Harris. While Gen Z turnout might, pick up a little bit compared to Biden just because of how old Biden is. Many Gen Z voters are turning away from him. But still in, blue wall, increasingly older population, it'll hurt Harris. Trump narrowly wins it by a likely margin. But that's it for the swing states. I don't see how he could win Nevada, Arizona. There's just too many partisan voters. In this day and age, there just are. So, after likely states, Trump now takes a huge lead of 229 electoral votes. Kamala Harris at 191, of course, 270 needed to win. Trump is, 41 electoral votes away from winning. So now we move on to lean states. These are states that will be decided by a 1 to 5% margin in my prediction. We'll start with Kamala Harris, if there are any. Virginia, I think Harris runs evenly with Biden. I don't see why here, unlike the Rust Belt, unlike the South, I don't see why here, why Harris would run better or worse than Biden. You've got these very well-educated white suburban voters near Washington, D.C. Turnout, I think, would remain exactly the same. Just because Trump is the Republican nominee, I feel like these very never-Trump voters wouldn't care who the Democratic nominee is. They're going to support Trump either way. And then New Mexico, even with Harris, I don't think she'd do that poorly here. The thing is with Harris, yes, you might think of her as a weaker candidate than Joe Biden. But honestly, I think that so many voters will just be more inclined to vote for her just because she appears much more competent than much more competent than Joe Biden. I feel like many would prefer her over Biden. If you did a poll across the nation, Democrats, Republicans, and Independents, who would you prefer as president, Harris or Biden? I think that Harris narrowly edges it out just because, she appears much more competent. In the debate, Joe Biden did not appear, able to do the job at all. Kamala Harris, she's 59, which is relatively young. Trump is almost 80. And that will be her biggest strength. So, in a really normal state like New Mexico, but really across the nation, that will come to her benefit. And that is why I think that in these pretty Democratic states, that polls in Biden versus Trump are going to appear competitive, like New Mexico and New Hampshire, Minnesota, Virginia. That's why I think Harris does stay strong in these areas. Minnesota, I would say, is lean Harris for these same reasons. It's the Rust Belt, sure, but, it's not really the Rust Belt. It's kind of on the outskirts of the Rust Belt, not as many white working class voters. That's why this did go to Hillary Clinton in 2016. But, a state like Minnesota, New Mexico, that appears competitive in Biden versus Trump, Harris would be able to hang on. These are the areas, these Democratic states, especially, with increased Gen Z turnout for Harris rather than Biden. That is how Harris would be able to win, is, hold on to these blue states. Now moving on, that would be it for lean states, I believe, for Kamala Harris. Yes, it is. I would, I guess, throw one. I would not, actually. I'm going to wait on that. On Nebraska second. Lean Trump states now. Georgia for sure. New Mexico for sure. These are a bit competitive because, of course, it is the South and we have very high African American population compared to the rest of the nation. Of course, Kamala Harris is an African American turnout. African American turnout is going to be much higher for her than it would be for Joe Biden if he were to be the nominee. Georgia went to Biden by 0.3 in 20 or 0.2 or whatever in 2020. North Carolina went to Trump by 1.3. Of course, Trump does better in both these states than 2020. I mean, the whole nation is going to shift to the right. I don't feel like we have to talk about those states too much. And then Arizona, I think, flips to Donald Trump. Joe Biden won this one by 0.2, or it was actually 0.3. He won it by 11,000 votes. Sorry, Biden did in 2020. But a very big reason of that was, because of the factor that Biden appeared presidential and Trump did not. In Arizona, there are many McCain Republicans, is what they're called. Very traditional, more traditional voters. Sorry if you hear that. I don't know. There's a car outside that's super loud, but these Republicans and independents, but mainly Republicans, are what cost Trump victory in Arizona in 2020 because they didn't like how Trump appeared so unpresidential while Biden did. His demeanor was very normal, returned to normal. So that is how Biden won in Republican Arizona. That's why Kari Lake lost in 2022 too. And again, that is an area where Kamala Harris doesn't. It runs worse than Biden, right? Is these Republicans, is these more moderate Republicans who are Republicans but switched to Biden in 2020 because they don't like Trump. Kamala Harris being a very different person and candidate through and through than Joe Biden. I feel that is going to be a very costly factor for a Kamala Harris candidacy, and she would lose Arizona because of that fact. Now let's move on. Pennsylvania is lean. The radical liberal campaign that Trump would run would definitely hurt Kamala Harris here. Suburbs. You've got families, or family-oriented, family-driven, family values-driven parents, voters, around Philadelphia. Harris would probably run worse in the suburbs than Joe Biden because they like how Biden remains, is kind of normal compared to Donald Trump. They don't like Donald Trump at all. So yes, Harris would, maybe find a little increase in turnout among African Americans in the urban areas in Philadelphia, which is, she would be able to run up her numbers there. But considering Biden only won it by 1.2 in 2020, would it be enough with the losses across the rest of the state? I don't see it. I think Pennsylvania goes to Trump in the end by a lean margin. And that would be it. So now let's move on to tilt states. These are states that will be decided by a margin of less than 1%. And by the way, Trump is already across 270, so he wins. Starting with Harris, New Hampshire, and Maine. These are just very Democratic states. Biden won Maine by 9. New Hampshire by 7 in 2020. Are we going to see a 10-point shift to the right? No. 7 points maybe, 9 points maybe, which is why I have these at tilt. And let me make Maine at large lean, just about a 1 to 2 point win. Harris is going to, these are just overwhelmingly white states. That's why Biden did so well in these states, because he was so normal. You have very old voters here as well, and Biden does very well among older voters, senior citizens, while Harris would definitely run worse than Biden, because of the fact that Biden is old and Harris is young. Harris would, Biden is running a campaign that seems to be really centered around winning older Americans. His policy positions are very aligned with that of older Americans. Kamala Harris's are not. They're centered around positions that, younger voters, Gen Z, would have. So these two states, because of those reasons, would be close. I don't think that she'd be weak enough to lose them. Trump wins Michigan by tilt. Trump wins Nevada by tilt. Nationwide shift to the right. But Michigan is close because it is the most Democratic of the blue wall states. So, if you've got Pennsylvania lean, if it's Pennsylvania is a 2-point margin for Trump, Michigan probably falls below 1% margin for Trump, and you have a high number of African American voters in and around the Detroit metro area. That boosts Harris. Nevada, I don't know. Nevada's becoming Republican, Latino, trend to the right, and what I was saying before with Latino voters being very moderate, Trump painting Harris as a radical liberal. These more moderate Latino voters will be turned away from Harris. But reproductive rights, Harris will definitely run her campaign on that. That'll, definitely make it close in Nevada, Michigan, Pennsylvania, where voters actually care about that. And then finally, Nebraska 2nd District probably falls into Harris's hands. I mean, Biden won it by 6.6. It's just the suburbs, that's it. So Trump wins with 312 electoral votes. Kamala Harris wins 226. So there is not a single state that I believe in this election matchup that would be different in Biden versus Trump. Not a single state that would flip. Now, the margins are different. Kamala Harris runs a lot better in terms of margins. In my prediction, I have Nevada lean more towards likely on that side. I have Georgia likely for Trump. I have North Carolina likely for Trump. I guess there are a couple where, and then I have Michigan lean for Trump as well. I guess there are a couple where Biden does better. New Hampshire, Wisconsin. That's basically it. So yeah, in Harris versus Trump, I still think Trump wins. So Trump is looking very good in this election, but Harris slightly overperforms Biden, I feel. So thank you all for watching this video. If you enjoyed, make sure to subscribe down below. It always helps out a lot. Let me hear your thoughts in the comments, and I will see you all next time. Thanks again.